Welcome to the Creative Community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guest this time is Suzanne Jill Levine, author, translator, emerita professor, and really someone who has brought Latin American literature to the world. So super exciting to have you here on the Creative Community.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me, David.
Yeah, and we're going to talk mostly about your new book, Unfaithful. I love the title, A Translator's Memoir. But you've done a lot, so we're going to kind of also try and loop in some of your other accomplishments. But I always love to hear about my guests' childhood, how they've kind of found their way to what they did. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, well, Unfaithful, basically, this book, the reason why I wrote it, because in a sense, it's part of a trilogy of books that started with my book on translation called The Subversive Scribe, which was kind of an early...
Back in 1991.
1991, and I was kind of sort of a poetics, but a very concrete poetics to show people how translations work, how they, how in my case it was a process of collaboration often, and certainly a creative process. But that was my first attempt to sort of memorialize the activity of translation, because from the time, and I will go back to the childhood, from the time of my early translations, I realized, wow, what happens behind the translation is so fascinating, and in some ways richer than actually the final product. So you say, well, I'd like to show people a little bit how that works. So that was that first book, and when Manuel Puig died, he was one of my main writers from Argentina, which was a great tragedy, like the loss of so many people. I decided to do a biography, which I did for Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. So that book sort of got me more into the autobiographical mode a little bit more. And then finally I came out with this book because I wanted to answer the question that you asked me. Who is this person? How did this person get into translation, and where do they come out of to do that? So
you were born in New York?
I was born in New York City. Yeah. And basically, and I'll read the prologue, which sort of sums up what I'm going to say here. But yeah, essentially, I grew up in the city in the '60s, and of course that was such an important era for so many things, and also a very progressive era compared to what had gone before.
What's going on right now?
and to what's going on right now. So I was very fortunate to grow up and be in the baby boom group, and basically, so I was interested in languages early on. I loved the way you sort of kind of lose yourself or become someone else in another language. It sort of brings out another part of you.
So you just had a natural facility for that.
Well, I did, and I guess your early experiences also helped, because my first French class, which was when I was 12, in junior high, or what they call middle school now, I had this marvelous teacher with a British accent. He was sort of like Alistair Sims, and he would say things to us. Kiddies, if you don't memorize those conjugations, you're going to be a stain on Academy Street. As if to threaten us, he'll throw us out the window. But he was so funny, and it was such an entertaining thing to learn the language, to express yourself in another language, that I just fell in love with that. And then
Spanish came along.
And then Spanish came along in college, because you had to take on, because those days you really. Those days you had a lot of requirements, which nowadays they get, but.
No, I remember having to take two languages.
Yeah, we had it was really, and so being a lazy person, I took Spanish as my second language, in the sense of lazy because I already knew the grammar, the basic grammatical structures, and obviously from French, but. And then I just really, I really felt much more of an affinity, although I always have loved France and French culture. But in terms of the language, there was such an energy about it, and the teachers too. I mean, they had more joie de vivre than the French teachers, who supposedly were supposed to have joie de vivre.
Yeah, okay.
But the Spanish teachers really had the joie de vivre. So basically, I became a Spanish major, and I went to Spain for a year, the junior year program, and all this coming from.
Which colleges are you attending?
I was at Vassar,
Vassar,
as undergraduate, and all this basically as coming from a very modest family. Not I basically got to Vassar because I had a scholarship, and to take the junior year abroad was such a great way for somebody who didn't have much money to then go on a program and be immersed in yeah. So it was just such a great thing to be in Spain that year, and of course I became totally immersed and loved the language, and had many boyfriends and all this kind of things, which is part of the way you learn language. And so I was cute those days. Anyway, so the point was that then when I started graduate school at Columbia University, which was I was about 20 or so there, I went back to the city, and basically, at that time, one of my teachers was Gregory Rabassa, who was the great translator of 100 Years of Solitude, and a lovely person, a wonderful, wonderful man who was a very good storyteller himself. And so I asked Greg, well, because I had been interested in translation for some time, because I figured, well, languages is what I like to do, and I want to write too. So I was a reader of literature and loved languages. So. He said, so I said to Greg, well, Greg, how do you start to be a translator? And he said, what do I have to do? He said, well, just translate.
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. Just do it. So basically, in that context, at that time, suddenly, this is the very late 60s, publishers in New York were starting to get interested in the new Latin American literature.
It was a big boom going on.
It was a boom going on. And there was this center called the Center for Inter-American Relations, which of course we made fun of that name a lot. Eventually became American Relations. Anyway, eventually became the America Society. But that's what it's called now. But anyway, so it's through that venue that I started to meet incredible people, and my personal life became engaged with these writers, and so I started to translate very early on. The first translation was actually with Cabrera Infante, Three Trapped Tigers, which was Tres Tristes Tigres. So I'll read something from it if you want. But
well, let's hear a little bit from your prologue of Unfaithful.
That's right. Okay, so I'll which explains what I just explained. But
so if people just joined us, Suzanne Jill Levine. Jill is reading from her book Unfaithful.
Yes, published by Bloomsbury, and it's part of a series actually, but that's the other side of things. It's part of a series that's called Translated By. Right. And because there's, since I began translating way back, 30, 40, 50, whatever years ago, translation has become much more recognized as an important field. Right. And now even there's a whole area of studies that's translators. Who are the translators?
You guys have got your own series on
we've got
so back in the 70s, it was kind of thought of as something dismissive. I mean, what was the
well, basically translators were considered very secondary characters
to the author herself.
Well, basically to the reader, because often it didn't say who it was translated by, to begin with, and this is of course goes back in history. And so basically, translators were also, obviously suspect in the sense of, well, is that really?
Or how faithful are you being to the original? Yeah.
How faithful is it? So basically, well, that's a problem.
Right.
And the whole point of that is to see how you can be creative and at the same time, and by being creative, give and ironically the most faithful version of what this writer is trying to do. Right. Yeah. So basically, but when I first began, and especially I entered academe because there was no way you're going to make a living as a translator. Right. As Henry James said, translators are miserably paid. So I had to go. It was obvious for somebody like myself to go into academe, and Yeah, they didn't even respect initially translators as scholars, and a translator is actually a scholar, a linguist,
gosh, yeah,
and a
right.
linguist, and in a way a novelist.
Right.
You know, if you were doing novels, or a poet. So it has to have a lot of actually talents and expertise. So. Yeah, so I think that since that, so I wrote The Subversive Scribe to sort of show academe that this was a scholarly as well as creative activity, and that it's essential to the understanding of literature.
Right.
I mean, you know, here people have been reading translations, most of the things we know of.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, you know, and in terms of tradition, I mean, well, the Bible, Homer, et cetera, but Dante, but, you know.
The Greeks.
The Greeks, I mean, you name it. So, and taking it for granted.
Yeah.
That, you know, you're reading the original.
Right, right.
And so, indeed, the Bible, isn't it funny, that's called King James Version?
Yeah.
Well, it already tells you it's a version, but it's the original.
Right.
So there's always been this side of fight between the original and the version. Version. But anyway, so basically, the issue here in terms of translation is that throughout these many years, I think, and I've been helpful, I believe, among many other colleagues in developing, you know, translation studies as a field, which of course, that's this translation isolation or lack of a sense of what translation is really was more of an American issue, because in Europe, for example, translation is very important. Because, you know, I mean, most of their books are translations,
right.
Whereas we only, it's the famous 3%, you know, so it's a real, because it's, you know, and also we're basically initially Anglo, you know, that English is the main language. Well, it's a wonderful language. I adore English. But the point of the matter is there are other languages out there that people speak. So anyway, the attitude toward translation is much different now. And
let's hear from the book.
Okay,
I want to, because I know it's been well reviewed, and I know you are also a poet yourself,
yes.
You know, and so I want to hear some Jill.
Okay, how I say it. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll just read the foreword because it's very brief and it says a lot about why this book has been created. Visiting the past is a chance to enlighten and perhaps lighten the present. History and my story cross paths beginning in the era of the Cuban Revolution and unfolding in New York City in the turbulent 1960s and 1970s and beyond. The political turmoil around the revolution, a mere 90 miles south of Key West, fomented worldwide interest not only in Cuba, but in all of Latin America. And on the literary front, prestigious presses in Paris and in New York, because also the New York presses followed the French presses, were suddenly eager to discover and to publish the great poets and masters of fiction, among them Jorge Luis Borges, Julio Cortázar, Pablo Neruda, as well as young Gabriel Garcia Marquez, we just mentioned, and a cast of new writers that I was to translate, like Manuel Puig and Guillermo Cabrera Infante, and writers from Cuba, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. It was a boom. It was like a literary gold mine, but it was popularly called a boom because of it was suddenly recognized in the international market. So, as a young translator, I had the fortune, as I say here, of being there.
Yeah, that's great.
And so that was one thing I wanted to say. And yeah, so.
Could you read something from Three Trapped Tigers?
Oh, yes.
You said this is your first one, and maybe give
Yeah.
us a little lead up. So,
Yes.
it's a pretty thick book. That
Now,
must have been
look at
pretty
this.
daunting.
Yes. When I first began translating, I was willing to do big books, but as the years went on,
They slimmed down.
Wait a minute. This is an awful lot of time.
Are you getting paid by the page?
This is taking
to go back to the kind of pragmatics.
That's right.
I mean, how are you
Well,
getting paid for something like this?
Okay, I was an unknown translator at the time, and I met Cabrera Infante with my beloved first really important boyfriend, who was quite much older than me, Emil Rodriguez Morigal, a wonderful literary critic who actually was a man of letters himself, and he was the one who sort of really promoted a lot of these new writers.
Right.
And so, so basically, I met Cabrera Infante in London, and that chapter is in here. In other words, this contains chapters about the different writers and how I got to meet them and all this sort of stuff, and fun things about them. So we met in London, and he was in the process, because he was, being Cuban, he was bilingual,
Sure.
of course, because Cuba in some ways belonged partly to North America at that point, to the United States. So he was translating for Harper and Row with a poet, an English poet named Donald Gardner. He was a British fellow, and which is nothing wrong with that. I love England and all its various accents. But anyway, so they were translating his main book, Tres Tristes Tigres, which was actually it still remains one of the best books ever about Havana. Which it's basically almost like Joyce's Ulysses, like the nightlife of all these creatures of the night, the photographers, musicians, actresses, all these sort of singers, and a fascinating collage of this city life. And what was wonderful about the new writing is that the new Latin American writers, what were they doing that was so unusual? They were inventing a new literary language, which came out of the various rich, Latin American countries, every region with its own language. And so basically,
you had to learn that then.
What?
You had to learn that language.
Absolutely.
In order to translate this book.
Absolutely. So he was doing this, and he was having a lot of trouble because Donald was a poet, and he actually was. There were certain chapters that Donald was very good for because he does a lot of literary parodies, and there's a parody from Alice in Wonderland and all that sort of stuff, and so Donald was very helpful with that. But in terms of spoken language, first of all, Cockney wasn't going to do the trick because, culturally, Cuba and Havana is closer to New York in that sense, as a very, I don't know if melting pot, but very mixed, culture of many different, ethnicities. So basically, I started to look at it with him, and before I knew it, he was saying, "Okay, you're going to help me with this." And so that was my first really. I mean, I had done some translating before then, but this was my first official, in a sense, work for a real publisher and all that sort of stuff.
Let's hear what you did.
Okay, so here we go. I'll just begin the first page, which of course you'll get a kick out of because it'll remind you of something you might have seen in a movie. Okay. It begins with this MC presenting all these people in the famous club Tropicana. Okay. Now, if you've seen The Godfather, there's a scene from the Tropicana, that part 2. Right. Okay. Showtime, señoras y señores, ladies and gentlemen, and a very good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Tropicana, the most fabulous nightclub in the world, el cabaret más fabuloso del mundo, presenta its latest show, su nuevo espectáculo, where performers of continental fame will take you all to the wonderful world of supernatural beauty of the tropics, the tropic al mundo maravilloso, extraordinario y hermoso, the tropic and the Tropicana, el trópico and Tropicana, in the marvelous production of our Rodney the Great, el Gran Rodrigo, entitled Me Voy para Brazil. That was Brazil for you, Brazil for you, and it says B-E-R-E, Brazil for you, ladies and gentlemen. He goes back and forth in other words, it's a bilingual. So you say, well, how did you translate that? Okay, and he says, that is my very, very particular version of it. Es decir, mi versión del Brasil de Carmen Miranda y de Joe Carioca. So Brazil, the land of Carmen Miranda and Joe Carioca, pero Brazil, dear public assembled here in this coliseum of pleasure and gaiety and happiness, Brazil, una vez más, Brazil, once and for always, Brazil, eternal Brazil, honorable dear visitors to our romance forum of song and dance and love by the candlelight. Ooh, 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 la, 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 my apologies.
That's great. You're right into that.
That's
right out of the gate.
Right.
So, I mean, obviously, you couldn't visit Cuba at that time in order to go and listen firsthand. But you did visit a lot of Latin American countries, I assume, in order.
Well, I did, and also meeting these writers, because most of them were living in exile for for political reasons, either left or right. Cuba, Chile, Argentina, the writers suffered all, for one reason or another, political.
So they were here in the
They
US.
were here. And he actually was in England because he actually did not want to be part of the Miami, because the association, he didn't want to be considered, because his parents were the founders of the Communist Party in Cuba. So it's just that he was against censorship, and that's why he left. That's why he was, fired from his job as an editor and of the most important journal there. Literary supplement of the main newspaper. Anyway, so basically, the way that I learned this was working with him, working with Cabrera Infante, working with Manuel Puig. I learned a whole vocabulary.
Just being around him.
Yes, and exactly. I was immersed, in a world of Latin Americans, whether it was there or Paris or wherever I was.
We only got about 7 minutes left, and
Yes.
I would love to hear a little Borges.
Okay.
That's one of the great writers of the century for sure.
Absolutely.
How did you come to translate Borges?
Well, Borges, first of all, I met Borges early on. Amir wrote the Dutton biography of Borges. So he was a critic who was, again, very closely connected with Borges and all these, wonderful Argentine writers. So Borges, so basically, in the year 2010, Penguin asked me to edit the 5-volume series of their paperback, the classics of Borges, which is basically, it's not the fiction. This fiction had already been done, so it was the poetry and the essays.
Okay.
And I did meet Borges. He was quite a character. But these stories, well, you guys will have to read the book.
We gotta read Unfaithful, a translator's memoir.
You have to read Unfaithful. This will tell you everything you want to know.
To get the scoop.
That's right, to get the scoop. So that's the deal, guys. Chaucer's has it, etc. Okay. So I will read this a piece. And by the way, this is a book. This was one of the poetry volumes. And this was called Poems of the Night. It was edited by a wonderful, brilliant man who just died recently, young Ephraim Cristal, who was a major professor at UCLA, so somebody who will be much missed. But anyway, I was the general editor of the whole series.
Right.
So, and I did translations, of course, for it. So here is, and I did I actually translated a lot of early Borges, which is the most difficult Borges, very Baroque. Anyway, this short piece is called Someone Will Dream. What will the indecipherable future dream? A dream that Alonso Quijano can be Don Quixote without leaving his village and his books. A dream that the eve of Ulysses can be more prodigious than the poem that recounts his hardships. Dreaming human generations that will not recognize the name of Ulysses. Dreaming dreams more precise than today's wakefulness. A dream that we will be able to do miracles and that we won't do them because it will be more real to imagine them. Dreaming worlds so intense that the voice of one bird could kill you. Dreaming that to forget and to remember can be voluntary actions, not aggressions or gifts of chance. A dream that we shall see with our whole body as Milton wished from the shadow of those tender orbs his eyes. Dreaming a world without machines and without that afflicted machine, the body. Life is not a dream, Novalis writes, but can become a dream.
Okay, that's thick stuff. I mean, when I'm listening to that, I feel like I'm having to listen to each sentence and each phrase, and then I'm going to have to go back and put it all together again.
Absolutely, and that's what the boom writers were like. But they were experimental, but they were entertaining.
Right.
So you wanted to go back. Yes, and here, of course, this book, one has to know, Borges was blind.
Right.
He was a blind poet, as was Milton. and as was Homer supposed to be. So it's sort of an important image in history of poetry, as you well know, of the blind poet who sees all, Tiresias and all. But anyway, so yes, so this obviously, he, as a blind person, had to live in the night a lot. These are called poems of the night. And so this particular book is just gorgeous, and it has a lot of poems about dreams, about the night, because that's the world he lived in, you know, and he's sort of giving his personal touch on that. Of course, the most famous Borges that we read, Fictiones, the Labyrinths, in a sense, all of that, in a way, is dreams. Often horrific dreams, but
and poetry as well too. In my mind.
Exactly, and basically exactly. So, what he's telling here, he's sort of bringing the future and the past and the present together in one instant, and so that's why these remarks seem very paradoxical. You know, that the future. What will the future dream? You know, Ulysses, you know, will not be recognized in future generations. In other words, it's trying to also imagine what's going to happen in the future. So but he says, we may try to imagine the future, we know the past, but all we have is the present. So all this is what he's asking, is he writing here? And in a way, his writing is often, or like poetry is often, like a question.
Right.
So that's, you know, it's for you to think about, right?
We only have about a minute left,
Yes.
and I mean, I wanted to ask you so many more questions, but could you tell me in a minute? I'm sure it's a hard one. But what I wanted to ask you is, you taught forever at UCSB. You taught translation studies. Yes. What the one or two things that you thought were the most important to convey to your students who were going on to become translators themselves? Basically,
I did begin a translation program there. And I think what I taught the students is that, and what Borges teaches us, is that the reader is the writer, that everybody's version of a book is a different version. And it's inevitable. It's not like you're doing it because, you know, it's like something you want to do. It's just inevitable, because every reader comes from his or her own context. And that context means the person's knowledge, the person's personality, the person's country, the political situation that the person is. All these things are what. So basically, translation is really an act of reading, and in that sense, an act of interpretation. You know.
I'm gonna have to stop.
And that's it.
That's a beautiful answer.
Yeah.
People who have been listening, watching. Unfaithful, a translator's memoir by Suzanne Jill Levine. Jill, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
The Creative Community is a production of TVSB. I'm your host, David Starkey, and we'll see you next time.